started. So today we're going to talk a little bit about fat loss. Now, here's what I'll give you kind of the backstory. When I started my own business, and this was 11 years ago. Yes, it was strength training based, but I learned very quickly that what would happen was I would give people programs and we would strength train, but they would never really get the nutrition part. They would never really get the hormone part. They're really not understanding those things, or those would be the things that that they would miss, right? And then they'd be like, "Well, I'm working out, but none of it's working. Like, why am I not seeing a physical change?" And so I flipped and I really started focusing on fat loss and hormones. And it wasn't because honestly I was super passionate about it. It was because I felt very obligated to do it. I knew that it was being done so horribly wrong. And so I felt for the longest time that I really needed to teach women how to do this in a way that didn't mean suffering endlessly. And so I spent a good part of my business teaching women fat loss. But it was never really my passion. And so last year, I kind of had this moment of just like, my passion is strength training. It really is. And so that is where kind of, StrongHER has come in and the shift in my business and where I'm focused on. That being said, I'm not against fat loss. I just think that because of the way that most women have been taught how to do it, women obsess, we obsess about things. And so we obsess about the wrong things. And so it doesn't create the outcome that we want. And the reason that I'm doing this now is that I go through probably twice a year a fat loss phase. It's usually pretty short, 6 to 7 weeks. And it's just because I'm still going through some hormonal shifts. And so it's happened, I think, 3 times now where I'll gain 8 pounds in a month without changing anything. It's just like, okay, here we go again. And the body's trying to figure stuff out. And so I want to teach you how to do this. Now, I'm going to take you through a webinar that I did several years ago, and it kind of broad strokes the whole process. And it was a webinar that led to an 8-week program that I helped people actually go through this process. I'm going to give you the broad stroke version of it. And then if you guys are like, okay, I like this, then I'll go a little bit deeper. I'm actually going through I'm going to start tomorrow after my birthday. I've already kind of prepped, and I'll tell you how I've prepped it first. And I go through these little periods probably like twice a year, and they're very strategic in how I do them. And so my hopes is that this helps you figure out how to not be, always chasing this goal and not quite really ever getting there, and being very strategic in how you do this. So that's going to be my hopes. And then if you guys decide that you want a little bit more of this, we can actually go a little bit deeper. So that's what we're going to do today. Let me share my screen really quick. Okay, I think looks like you guys can see that. So Fat Loss Fix was the webinar that I did. Again, it leads into a bigger program, and really it was designed to give women a system that is a rinse and repeat system to if you have 10 pounds or more, right? So I think the last time I did this, I lost like 8 pounds in about 6 weeks. Yes, Jess, today is my birthday. I was checking chats. Today's my birthday. So we'll go through again. I'll broad stroke this, and then we'll kind of dive in. And what I will say is there's different phases, and I'll walk you through those phases. So as we hit those phases, if you have questions in them, make sure you jump in and ask. So, and you can if you don't want to just rely on the chat, you can just ask the questions. You can even turn on your video. I've got it to where it's pinned on me so that even if you jump in and ask a question and it shows you see yourself on the video, it doesn't record you. It only records me. Or so Zoom says so far that we've used. So this again was a webinar. So it's just an introducing me. I left this in here because I wanted you to see it's not always perfect. And this is probably the least bloated I had been. I've had 2 other episodes where I was way more bloated and just heavy and holding on to a ton of water. And really, I just left it in here so that you see that, like, it's not like this arrival where you never have to do anything again. It's like, I've got all these things in place and everything works and I don't ever have to worry about that extra 10 pounds. Sometimes it just comes back, especially as you're still trying to get across the finish line. And that's where I'm at, is at that very end stage. And I actually had some hormones kick up again. And I'm happy to answer questions on that if we get to that. So just wanted to leave that in there so you can see I am not perfect either. Introduction, you guys don't need to know that. Here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to recover the 3 things you must have for successful weight loss / fat loss. We'll talk about the difference in that. We're going to talk about the biggest mistakes that sabotage results and how to avoid them. And then I'm going to walk you through what I created, the Lean Physique Ladder. It's a systematic step-by-step approach to sustainable results. So you're in the right place if you're a 40+ woman who's frustrated that your waistline keeps growing, even if your habits haven't changed. I get this all the time, almost daily. I'm not really doing anything different, but it's all settling in my waistline. You've tried things like intermittent fasting, keto, you've tried cutting out sugar, carbs, alcohol, you've increased your workouts, but you just cannot get the scale to budge. You feel like your metabolism is broken. That's probably one of the most common things I hear. And you want results that you can sustain without forever living in deprivation or feeling that you have to live in the gym. That's not how we do it. So here's what's happening in midlife. We talked a little bit about this. Sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are going to start dropping off. Estrogen doesn't just slowly, tailor off. She's a fighter. She likes to swing up and down. And so that's what creates a lot of that chaos in perimenopause. But the result of this is that, 1, you become more stress sensitive and you become less insulin sensitive, right? So our stress hormones, cortisol, are out of their normal sync. And so we don't handle stress as well as we used to. And we don't process things like carbohydrates as well. Those cells are not as sensitive to the message that insulin sends to take that in and use it. So because of that, cortisol and insulin, fat storage is where we kind of tend to lead towards, particularly in the waistline, instead of fat burning state, which means that our waist increases. So metabolism 101 is that, oh, it cut out some of my little icons. Calorie restriction is going to increase stress. Your metabolic system does not like calorie surplus, and it also doesn't like a calorie deprivation or restriction. It doesn't like either. And what it's always going to do is try to put itself back in homeostasis. It likes whatever is coming in and whatever's going out to be the same number. And so it's always trying to find that. It's trying to like, oh, this cut back, so then I've got to do this. It's always making that adjustment. So when you scale back, that creates stress. And then the other thing you have to keep in mind is that workouts are stress. Even if they're your stress relief, which they are for me too, physiologically, they are stress. So we got to keep those things in mind. So here are some of the biggest mistakes that I see. The most common is too extreme options, right? Which create the boomerang effect. So remember, the metabolic system wants homeostasis. So when you cut out things like sugar, alcohol, or your calories too low, what happens is your metabolic system pushes back and says, okay, well, let's make her more hungry. Let's make her more tired. Let's increase the cravings because she's cutting back, which is creating stress. Well, now cortisol is up. So now I need more carbs. So increase sugar cravings, right? And so it tends to create this boomerang effect where you're cutting and then you're going into these more binging type states where you're overeating at night, on the weekends, and at social events. We cut way, way back, and then we hit the weekend. And on the next thing you know, we've had too much to drink. We're drinking more on the weekends. We're eating out all the time. Or this, and I see this one a lot too, where you think you're being really good in the morning because you're scaling back and you're not eating that much, and you do okay for lunch, and then by the afternoon you're nibbling, right? And by the time you get to dinner, you're eating the most of your calories and you're just overeating because you're so hungry, right? So those are extreme options. Fasting is an extreme option. Fasting for 12 hours is very different than fasting for 16. And what this can create is the boomerang effect where when you fast, and this is one of the reasons that most people actually don't do super well with any kind of fasting technique, some do, but not most, is that because of the deprivation, then you swing into being hungry, and those large meals are harder to digest. They have too many calories for your body to be able to digest in that sitting, which then also creates more insulin than your body can process, right? So what it's supposed to be doing, it starts to do that, but then the second that you overeat, which most people do, it reverses all of that. Third, excessive workouts, cardio. Let me go do more stuff, burn more calories. But what most people don't realize, if you pay attention, when you start increasing your workouts, it also increases hunger hormones and it decreases your overall energy, right? So all of a sudden, I've scaled back and I'm noticing that I'm hungry, right? I'm doing more workouts and now I'm noticing that I'm hungry. Maybe some of you guys have noticed this, that you tend to be hungrier on the days that you lift weights because there's a metabolic demand. So your body wants those calories. And when it doesn't get them, it increases more hunger hormones and it decreases your energy, so you slow down. And that's what it will do to create that homeostasis. So failure to progress. The other thing that you need to know is that when it comes to the metabolism, this is metabolism 102, is that the metabolic system, the metabolism, is highly adaptable. So your approach has to progress, right? Everybody's heard of the plateaus. Okay, we've got to be able to work past those, because one of the magnificent things about our metabolism is that it does adapt. So I always use the analogy kindergarten through 12th grade. In kindergarten, you learn your basics, your ABCs, your 1, 2, 3s, and how to color and play on the playground with Susie, right? And get along. And then you take those skills and the things that you've learned and you progress to first grade, right? And then once you're in first grade, you're like, okay, 1 + 1 and 2 + 2, and you're starting to progress. And then you go to second grade and you keep building on that. This is the same thing. You've got to be able to start with your basics and then you layer in strategies that, what I call spreading the caloric gap, is that we create a gap to where we're losing weight, but then we've got to be able to layer in strategies to spread that as your metabolic system starts to adapt. So keeping that in mind, there are 3 things that you must have in order to have successful weight or fat loss. And I'm going to stop there for just a second because those words are used interchangeably. And so I want to make sure that you understand them. Let's say that you are someone who, for easy math, is 300 pounds. And you're like, I want to lose 100 pounds. Okay, well, somebody who's 300 pounds actually has a really good amount of muscle. You can't carry around a frame of 300 pounds if you don't have a decent amount of muscle, right? So what you have to understand is that when you go to lose weight, the body actually doesn't want to just burn fat. It wants to get rid of muscle because muscle is what we call metabolically expensive. It requires things. And so your body will say, well, get rid of the muscle, keep the fat. And if you've ever seen somebody, and I've seen a lot of them, I used to see a lot more when it was really big to have like gastric bypass and different surgeries, and people would lose 70, 80, 90 pounds pretty quickly. And then I'd have people, I remember this lady that came to me when I was early in the game, and she was like, I just have to tell you something. I had surgery. I knew what the risks were, but I just kept thinking, if I lose 100 pounds, I'll look so different. And I was like, okay. And she goes, exactly. And I was, as some of you know, I don't have a poker face. And I was like, what do you mean? And she goes, you can't tell. And I was like, well, I didn't know you before. She goes, but you can't tell that I lost 100 pounds. And don't you think you should? And I was like, listen. And I told her, like, 100 pounds off your body is 100 pounds off your body. But she understood that it didn't create the look she wanted, because what happened is, just by restricting calories, her body started shedding off muscle. Too much muscle. So what we want to do is, if you have a larger amount of weight to lose, we know we're going to lose some muscle, but we want to limit that. We want to keep it very limited. Now, if you're someone who you're just like, listen, we're probably 10 pounds away from my goal, there's a very good chance that we just really need to change your composition to create the look that you want. Keeping in mind that muscle is about 1/3 the size of fat. So you could weigh 150 pounds and be 30% body fat and look completely different weighing 150 pounds and being 25% body fat. They look completely different, right? So it's not just the weight, that's fat loss. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's how you can kind of look at that and go, okay, well, what ultimately is my goal? So the three things that you have to have is, first, you have to have hormonal balance, for better, lack of a better word, is we can't have hormones that are super chaotic, right? So if you're balancing sleep issues, if you're battling, sugar cravings, and we'll go through, schmeck, we'll go through all that. If you're battling all of that, that is not a time that you go, I'm going to go lose some weight, because your body's going to be very resistant. And keeping in mind, the second you put yourself into a deficit, that increases stress, and your metabolic system is going to go, this is too much. I'm definitely not going to be able to burn. And so it increases hunger hormones. It will push back even harder. So we want a certain level of function when it comes to your hormones. I see a chat. Hold on a second. Hi, Kitty. Yes, it's tuna time. So here we are. So that's the first thing that you have. The second that you have to have is you do have to have a caloric deficit, right? And we're going to talk about how to create that, but we want a small one. We don't want a big one, because we don't want a bunch of pushback, and I'll show you how to create that. And then we need a sustainable system over time. And I'm going to teach you how to get in, achieve, get back out, so that you're not feeling like you're always in a deficit. All right, so this is the Lean Physique Ladder. There are 4 phases that I'm going to walk you through. And the first is one that we've talked about before, that phase 1, which is the hormonal reset, again, for lack of a better word, is we want to make sure that your schmecht is in check. So remember, schmecht is sleep, cravings, hunger, mood, energy. I just spelled that wrong. Cravings, again, and digestion. Okay, so when we do this, we want to rate it on a scale from 1 to 5. 1 meaning my symptoms are very severe. 5 meaning I don't really seem to have symptoms. So if we did this for sleep, for example, my sleep at a 1 means I have a hard time going to sleep. I have a hard time staying asleep. I wake up not having enough sleep and being super tired, and it's every night, right? So that would be a 1. A 5 could be I don't have an issue going to sleep. Sometimes I wake up because maybe I have to go to the bathroom or something wakes me up at night, but then I go right back to sleep. And when I wake up in the morning, I feel very rested and I feel good. That would be a 5. We want all of these to be at a 4 or 5 before you ever even think of going into a deficit. Because if you're not at a 4 or 5, your body is going to push back, because we're going to push those, right? Anytime you put yourself into a deficit, things like hunger are going to go up a little bit, right? Your sleep may go off just a little bit. So we've got to be able to have them in a really good place before we start to go into a deficit. So we're looking at, we've talked about these as well, leptin and ghrelin. That has to do with satiation. So if leptin is balanced, we're satiated. If ghrelin is too high, then we're hungry. Insulin and cortisol, if they're swinging all over the place, that's going to affect hunger. It's going to affect your cravings. It's going to affect sleep, right? So we've got to kind of keep those in check and make sure that they're balanced. Sleep is a big one. Meals and the timing. Are we eating regularly? And everybody is different. This is very individual. Some people do just fine on 3 meals per day. I typically do 3 meals, I would say 4 meals and kind of a snack in the afternoon, which could be the same caloric intake of a meal. So I would say 5 per day. I used to do 6. So it's really just about figuring out, like, how do I keep my blood sugar level and make it a lifestyle that works for me? Also, in terms of digestion, if you're somebody who has issues with digestion, you probably want a few smaller meals than larger meals, right? So you got to feel out the timing of that. And then we want to make sure that we're already solid in our nutrition big 3. Am I getting enough water? Am I getting enough protein? Can I digest enough protein? Am I getting enough fiber? Can I digest that fiber? Those have to be in place. Do I have stress management tools? Do I have known stress coming up? Right? So with one-on-one clients, it's always like, okay, what's coming up, like, that you know of? Because we know there's unknowns that are going to hit, that we're going to have to navigate. What are the knowns? We don't go into known issues going, yep, I'm going to lose weight right now. It's a terrible time to do that. So we've got to, and we have to have stress management tools in place. Am I already leisure walking? To some degree. Again, digestion. So we want lower inflammation. We want to increase metabolic efficiency. So our waistline gets smaller and the energy goes up. So we want all of these in place first, so then we can go into phase 2. No questions so far. Okay, so phase 2 is the cut. This is where you start to create a caloric deficit. So here's how you do this. First, I highly recommend getting some kind of tracker. Now, here's what you need to know about this. All of the numbers that we talk about, they're all, you're just going to use them as baseline numbers, and you're looking at the trend. They are not 100% accurate, right? So we just want to see, like, what is my trend? What is my tracker saying that I'm burning throughout the day? And then you start to figure out what your intake is. Now, here's what could happen, and it happens quite frequently. Let's say that your tracker is saying that you're burning approximately 2,500 calories per day, and you start being very diligent, not eyeballing. We don't eyeball when we track food. You're measuring, you're weighing, you're being really diligent about counting everything, including fat calories. And you're like, well, my weight is stable, but I'm only eating 2,200 calories. Then that means your maintenance calories is actually 2,200. Does that make sense? We're good? So once you find out what your maintenance calories is, you're going to cut that by 200 to 300, which is not a lot because we don't want pushback. Now, because we're not cutting back a lot, this means you don't have a lot of room for error, which means that you cannot go on huge benches on the weekend. We don't have room for that. We've got to be able to keep that 200 to 300 calorie deficit for the most part all week long. And you'll know that you're doing a good job of doing that when uncomfortable hunger comes up. It's just a little uncomfortable. It's noticeable. It's not like I'm starving, I'm about to eat, everything. That's not what it feels like. But you just notice, like, I'm definitely more hungry. And you have to get used to surfing that feeling. You will be a little bit hungry. And what that means is, how do you know what your base is? I'm going to go back, and I kind of figured that people would get lost there. Anna asked, how do you know what your base is? I'm going to go back and explain that and then re-ask that question if I don't cover it. But you have to be able to surf that uncomfortableness. And typically what will happen is if you can surf it a little bit, that's when you're going to see the drops in the scale. Because remember, the metabolism will increase hunger hormones when it's not in homeostasis. So that is your signal that it's working, that it's like, okay, I'm just a little bit hungry, which means that I should start to see the scale go down. You're going to do this, making sure that you maintain your nutrition big 3, and that you're not, there's supposed to be a little poop right there, that you're not eating bullshit calories, right? You're going to work some of those in, but you're not leaning into them. And here's what the easiest way to do this is: you map out how to hit your macros. If you've been practicing getting protein and you have been getting at least 100 to 120 grams of protein and you can digest it, then the good rule of thumb is you want 1 gram of protein per goal of body weight, up to 150 the first time you do this. I would not go over 150 the first time, because if you jump, you won't be able to digest it. You're going to be miserable. Now, what will happen is if you focus on protein and eating mostly whole foods, you'll be able to hit your calorie deficit with ease because you're going to be so full. And then that leaves you a couple hundred calories that you can eat whatever you want. And you want to make sure that you are building those in just a little bit so that you have some nutritional relief. Otherwise, you're going to have a harder time sticking this out. So anytime I go into a deficit, so I'll give you typical numbers, like, keeping in mind I'm 6'2", weigh right now about 180 pounds. So I burn, at least 2,800 calories a day, easily. So when I put myself in a deficit, I typically start with about 2,500 calories, and I will give myself a good 300 calories of whatever I want. Because I eat 165 grams of protein, I make sure I'm hitting fiber. I eat mostly whole foods. So when it comes down to it, I know that there's 300 calories that I can have whatever I want. And that allows me to be able to do this for a longer period of time. How do you know if you can't digest a lot of protein? So I'm going to go back and answer both of these. So Anna asked, how do you know what your base is? Do you mean in terms of what your maintenance is? Like how many calories, like where to cut from? So like I said, I know my base is around, 2,800. And so when I go cut 200 to 300 calories off, that puts me at 2,500. Is that what you mean for your base? Like
Yeah.
what this is?
Yeah.
So the way to find that is you can use your tracker, but keep in mind, it may not be super accurate. So like what I've been doing over the last couple of weeks is I've been doing not 100% logging, but like I've been doing certain logging to figure out like, okay, what am I eating on average that's maintaining my weight? And the answer was, most days 2,700, 2,800, some days more, a little bit more than that, right? And that's kind of like where, so I knew that that's where my maintenance was, that whatever my tracker was telling me was pretty accurate. But yours may not be. When you go to track, you may find that your tracker's telling you you're burning 2,500 calories, but you're eating 2,200 and you're not losing weight. Then that means your base is 2,200, not 2,500. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Did I get everybody on that one? Okay. So your base is, or your maintenance is whatever you can eat without gaining or losing weight. That's your base. Now, if your hormones are a wreck, it won't matter. Like I've seen women who are like, I added 400 calories, didn't gain weight. I took away 400 calories, didn't lose weight, right? Because their hormones were definitely not in the right place. So you got to make sure that your hormones are in that good place first. And then you find your base, then you cut 200 to 300 calories. How do you know if you can't digest a lot of protein? You will be very constipated. That will be the first thing, is that your bowels will slow down. Protein and fiber are harder to digest, which is great for overall metabolic health, and it's great for blood sugar regulation. But if you can't break it down and digest it, it's going to make you constipated. So you want to titrate that up a little bit at a time. Does it make more sense to have smaller short-term goals like 10 pounds or larger target goal like 160 pounds? That's a great question. It's highly individual, and I'm gonna teach you how to know when you're done. Everybody has, because keep in mind this is stress to your system, and it's also mental stress. It requires some mental stuff going on. And so you'll hit a place where you're like, I'm done. And I'll teach you. That's a really good question. I'll teach you when you know you're done. You're like, okay, I got to take a break, or at least, back off for a little bit. Considerations to take is that most women are used to like cutting out carbs or not eating breakfast. And so the idea of not having to track is very appealing. However, if you're not cutting out whole food groups and doing something super restrictive, how do you know what you're actually eating, right? Especially if a handful of nuts. Yeah, right. A handful of nuts. That's a lot of calories. I need you to get down. You're in the way. Thank you. So you have to keep in mind this whole like intuitive eating. If your blood sugar is not regulated, intuitively, your body's going to be like, hey, let's go have some sugar. You're going to be having more cravings than you would than if you are hitting your big three. So you got to track, guys. Like, and it's not a forever thing, but I've never coached anybody who's gotten to their goal who didn't track. And I've been doing this for a really long time. I've never seen it. I've seen people hit short-term fat loss or weight loss from extreme calorie manipulation. But I've never seen somebody do this over the long haul that I personally have worked with who didn't track in some regards, at least in the beginning. Not forever, but at least in the beginning. And it's actually not that hard once you do it. It takes time in the beginning to learn how to do it, but then once you do it, it's actually not that hard. And I can teach you guys how to do that too if you want. Things you have to consider is weekend and social events, holidays. If you are really good Monday through Friday, and then the weekend is just like one outing after another where you're eating out and there's alcohol, you're not going to gain. And let's say you lost a pound, right? And then over the weekend you gain back 2. That's not 2 pounds of fat, but it is 2 pounds of water and inflammation that you're going to have to get rid of before your body's going to start to burn fat. So it's like you're starting over every time. So when I work with people, I'm always like, number one, you should, if you have a weight loss, fat loss goal, you should track it, which means that you should be weighing in every single day. The reason being is you want to see what the trend is. Your Friday number, your goal on Monday is to be the same number as you were on Friday. That's how you have to go into this. So you're not starting over every single time. And the other thing, the other reason why I recommend that is because your weight will fluctuate. And if you do it once a week, but you hit it on a day where you fluctuate up, you're going to go, why am I even bothering? I didn't lose any weight. In fact, I gained a pound. Well, you may have been doing everything right, but you had a really hard workout. And so you have extra inflammation. You're not taking that into consideration. And all of a sudden you think it's not working. So why bother? So you want to do it every day so you can see the trends, not because that number is super accurate, but because you want to be able to track the trend. So hopefully that makes sense. So keep in mind things like weekends, social events, and holidays. And like, what's the plan? Plan ahead. How am I going to do this? Things that you need to watch. Fat intake. Huge. I get this all the time where people are like, I eat healthy. And then I look at what they're eating and it's like whole eggs, which are not bad. Avocados, not bad. Salmon, not bad. Butter, not bad. Nuts, not bad. However, all of those things are fat, not protein. They are fat mostly. And when we look at caloric value for protein and carbs, there are 4 calories for every gram. Protein and carbs, there's 4 calories for every gram. For alcohol, there's 7. And when you go to track this, sometimes you're going to, and that's how I always know that something was alcohol related. If I'm looking at somebody's macros and the protein, carbs, and fat don't equal to the calories, I'm like, all right, there's alcohol in there because it doesn't fall under those 3. It's kind of like the 4th macro. It's its own. It has 7 calories for every gram, and fat has 9. So a little bit of fat is going to increase your calories substantially. Doesn't mean to remove fat. It just means you need to be aware of it. Things to also watch are your weight fluctuations, right? On the weekends, make sure that you keep it in check as much as you can. And then what we want to do is take that information and be very clinical with it and not critical. And this is a challenge when it's your weight because it's really easy to be like, and get emotional and this doesn't work and I've never been able to do this and I'm a loser and I have no self-control, like all the things like you just tell yourself, right? And so instead you want to just go, okay, if I was looking at this, if I was Jen and I was looking at this and I'm looking at somebody else's numbers, let me get clinical and go, what's missing, if anything? Maybe I just need to ride this out for a little bit. So we always want to use a detective mindset and get more clinical versus being critical. Big impact action is making sure that you're nailing your macros, and then movement over exercise. Keep in mind, you don't want to increase your exercise. You can maintain whatever it is that you're doing. If you're already lifting, fantastic. Keep lifting. Just don't add more lifting. Don't add more cardio. Not yet. We want to, and the reason that we want to still lift is that we're telling the body, it's almost like your body's going to want to get rid of muscle, but it almost like says like, no, don't burn this. It's like it puts up a big sign. It's like, hey, we really like to keep this muscle. So I do recommend that you still lift, but I wouldn't add more lifting sessions thinking you're going to burn more calories and that will help. No, you add more lifting sessions and it's going to increase your hunger. If you add a ton more cardio, it's going to increase your hunger. So we want a baseline first. And what we want to do is focus on movement, general walking. That's the second phase. Okay, now what you're going to do, let me go back. You're going to stay in this phase and you're going to keep adjusting your calories, adjusting like a little bit at a time until you're seeing some consistent loss. Now, in midlife in particular, you're looking at maybe a half a pound to maybe a pound per week. And it may take you a week or two to find your stride, right? That happens too, until you learn how to track or you're making sure that your hormones are fine and all that's kind of settling in. And then expect half a pound to a pound is pretty typical. That's what working looks like, right? Now, once you hit a place where you have a 2 week period, at least 2 weeks, where you're doing everything, but the scale has stopped moving. You're sure of it. Like, I'm doing all the things, it's all good. All that means is that your metabolic system has adapted. So we talked about this before, in that your basal metabolic rate, your BMR, your body will slow down how much you're burning to match whatever you're eating. Your metabolic system will always slow down to match what you're eating. That's homeostasis. So it's going to slow down. It will also slow down as you lose weight, right? So then we go, okay, now I've hit a plateau and nothing's working. What do I do? This is what I call spreading the gap. You have to take that gap that you had and you have to create a little bit bigger gap. And the easiest way to do this is to simply ask yourself, is it easier for me to eat a little less, or is it easier for me to move a little bit more? And if you ask yourself that right now, you probably immediately know the answer to that. I know the answer to that. For me, the answer is always, I'll just move more. It's just easier for me to move more. I don't like dieting at all. Now, some people who have dieted before and are used to dropping down to 1,200 calories, because they're like, I don't have time to be doing more exercise, they're like, just I'll cut back another 200 calories. Or you can bridge the gap. So maybe you do, I scale back by another, 100, 200 calories, and then I make sure I burn an extra 100 per day, right? So that way you just are kind of playing the numbers so that you're just spreading that gap a little bit more. Hopefully that makes sense. Other things that you can take a look at is you can toggle your carbs and fat based on your activity and insulin sensitivity. And this is where you kind of have to play with it. Keep in mind that carbs are great when you're more active, right? Your body wants those carbs. So I would say you would go a little bit higher carbs on days where you're lifting weights or you're doing lots of activity. On days where maybe you're just walking, then you could probably scale your carbs back a little bit. So you can play with that and go, well, I don't really need as many carbs because I don't need as much energy producing food, right? So I can increase my fat a little bit and then I can scale my carbs back. So you can play with it and toggle that. Again, you can toggle your intake and you can also toggle your activity levels. So we're going to play with those a little bit. Increasing your strength. I will always recommend increasing walking first if you can. However, walking does require more time. And so if you're like, I've got to be very time sensitive, then you can look at strength training. If you weren't strength training before, you can add a couple of days of strength training in. You can look at the frequency with what you're training. So maybe you're doing 2 days a week of strength training. You could up that to maybe 3. You could, maybe you're doing 2 days of strength training. You're like, you know what? I'm going to do a day of cardio. You can start to just titrate that a little bit. What I would recommend that you do is that when you're looking at layering in exercise, not movement, but exercise in particular, you increase it by 20 to 25-minute increments so that your body has a chance to adjust. If you said, I'm doing 2 days of strength training, I'm going to do an hour of cardio on another day, because of the length of time that you're doing the cardio, there is a very good chance that your hunger hormones are going to go up. But if you do 25 minutes, 2 days a week, right? Or 1 day a week as you start to test it, the metabolism isn't going to freak out over that. It's going to be like, oh, it's fine. We're okay. So, because remember, it's small increments that we're starting to play with. So we want to increase leisure walking. We can add a little bit of cardio in there. Another thing that you could add is you could be like, okay, I'm doing 2 days of strength training. Now I'm at, 2 days of list cardio, 20 days a week. I'm going to add some kind of hit or sprint workouts after my workouts, or even prior to lifting. And I'm only going to do that for 12 minutes, right? That quick little get a hit going, and that way I increase my metabolic rate. These are all little shifts that you can make as you're trying to plow through a plateau. What is LIST? Low impact steady state cardio. So it is what some people will call zone 2. And it just means it's characterized by having enough breath that you could have, like if I was standing next to you, you could have a conversation with me, you could talk to me. You wouldn't want to talk the whole time. So you're somewhat breathless, but not to where you can't talk. That's kind of what it feels like. And what it does is it just keeps everything super steady state instead of like up and down, which has a tendency to create more stress in the system, which then would create more increase in hunger hormones. All right, I think we're good there. So on to phase 4, moving into maintenance. And here's how you'll know it's time to move into maintenance. And you can do longer moving back to maintenance, or you could do short ones. I'll give you an example of the last time that I did this. Moving into maintenance means you are either at your goal, or you notice that you're just getting snackier. You're noticing that it's just harder to hit your macros. You're noticing that on the weekends, you're sneaking stuff in that you hadn't been. And it's just that mental and physiological fatigue and your body's way of saying, I'm starting to check out, right? And so that's how you'll know. And you're like, okay, I either need to get completely out or I need to at least take a break. And I did this the last time. I lost, I'm going to say ended up being 8.5 pounds in six to 7 weeks, something like that. I knew by week 6 that I was like, oh, I got to wrap this up. Like I can normally hit about 5 or 6 weeks before I'm like, nope, can't do it anymore. So at that point, you can work your way, and I'll tell you how to do it. You can work your way back to maintenance. And then you could come back depending upon numbers. I'll tell you in a minute. And then you could just do a quick break and then jump back in. I've had clients do that before, and they're fine with it. They just had a quick break. But basically, to pull yourself back out of maintenance, you don't just go from, let's say that you worked your way down and you're at, I don't know, 1,500 calories, right? And normally you eat 2,000 or 2,200, right? Well, you can't go from 1,500 to 2,200 calories. You're going to gain it all back. So you go 1,500 and then you increase it to 1,600 while maintaining your exercise or increasing it. And then you go from 1,600 to 1,700. You go 1,700 to 1,800. The goal is to maintain weight within a couple pounds while you're slowly increasing calories. And you can, at this point, start to slowly increase your strength training, because then there's a metabolic demand for those calories. Does that make sense? Now, if you go with the break part, one option, and again, you just kind of have to test it, and usually you can just feel it, right? Like I can either do this or I can't. Or you think you can, and within 2 days you're like, nope, can't do it. Is if you, let's say you're at the 1,600 calories, and you're like, I just need a little bit of a break, and you start to move out of it a little bit, right? Just to get some nutritional relief, and you end up going back to 1,800, and you're like, okay, let me just stay here for a second. And then you go back down. You can go back down as long as you're physically and mentally capable and it's still working. Hopefully that makes sense. Questions so far? Okay. Okay, so a word on the scale. Keep in mind that these numbers are not fat. It's like your entire body. You've got water retention, you've got inflammation and digestion to keep in mind, right? So how much did you digest every day? I've had this happen quite a lot. People don't realize this, is that I have a woman who's like freaking out. She's like, oh my God, the scale went up 1.5 pounds and I've been doing everything right. And I'm like, yeah, you did a leg workout yesterday. Like the body is full of inflammation from that workout. It's not fat. So you're going to see a 2 to 3 pound fluctuation, but what you want is to see that fluctuation come down over time. That's what we want. It's going to bop up and down. We want it to trend down while it's bopping up and down. The scale is a tool that can be very helpful. You just have to keep in mind that it measures weight. It does not measure composition of that weight, and that can be misleading. So sometimes you'll see, or you may experience, like the scale hasn't moved, but my jeans are fitting better. What is that? I mean, it's either loss of water, inflammation is going down, or you are actually, in fact, making a composition change. That can absolutely happen. Heather, how often do you recommend getting on a scale? Every day, once a week. When you are in an intentional deficit, I recommend doing it daily so that you can see the fluctuations and you're not catching it. Again, because it's going to go up and down, right? You may think you're doing everything right. And let's say that you always check on Mondays. Well, you could catch it on a bad day and it's up 2 pounds from the last Monday. And then you freak out and you think something's wrong, but really nothing's wrong. It's just in the fluctuation. So when you are in an intentional deficit, I recommend doing it every day. When you're not, I don't think you need to do it at all. Unless you want to. Can you use body measurements instead of the scale to reduce fat via this program? Yes. Because keep in mind that as you change composition, that's going to show up in how your body looks. So the ones that I would absolutely recommend checking in terms of body fat, especially for most women, are going to be a chest measurement, which is right across the nipple line, all the way across your lats, making sure that it's straight. And the reason being is that you'll lose weight in your breast tissue and your back. So a lot of times women will notice it in their bras, like my bras are like sliding off. I had to get a smaller bra. You can do it off your waist. I like a not true waist measurement. I like to measure about 1 inch below the belly button because that's just where most women carry fat. We don't need the smallest part of your waist. We want to know, like, is the biggest part of your waist going down? And then your hips. So those are typically the ones that I will have someone keep track of. Does inflammation have weight? Yep. So inflammation in your system is pulling water in, and so it will hold on to that water as it tries to work that inflammation out. So yes, that's why you want to keep that in mind. Tracking food. You must be willing to look at what is in order to create what you want. And what I recommend doing is that you get a scale, a food scale, and I highly recommend, I honestly, MyFitnessPal is still my favorite. And because I think it's the simplest way to do it, I recommend you just pay for it because it will allow you to use a barcode scanner. So when you're using labels and stuff, I highly recommend you stop using 12 different ingredients in the things that you're eating and you do single ingredient stuff as much as you possibly can. You can create recipes in there and figure out how to hit your targets. I highly recommend that you figure out what hits those targets and then you plan ahead. So with my one-on-one clients, I have them actually put their meals in the week ahead. Like, this is what you think you're going to eat at least a couple of days in advance. Because if you try and do it as you go, it's going to suck and you're going to be terrible at it. So once you know how to hit your numbers and then you know what it is, it's plugged in. It's like, and then that's just what you eat, right? And then you save those little bullshit calories so you can just have whatever you want. So I highly recommend you map it out, figure out how to hit them, and then that's what you eat, saving a little bit for nutritional relief. And then the point that I make down here is that you have to keep in mind that as inconvenient as it can feel, it's very temporary. I don't do macros all the time. I rarely do macros. Every now and then I'll check something new. I'll plug it in just to see what a meal looks like. Like, am I hitting enough protein with this meal? Am I hitting enough carbs based on days that I lift? Things like that. If I notice a dip in my energy, I'll check every now and then. I'll throw stuff in, but I am not a macro counter in order to maintain weight. That's not me. And I know that most women have done way harder things. You know what I mean? Like, we've lived off of juice and cabbage soup and we've done all of these way harder things. This is not that hard once you do it, and keep in mind that it is very temporary. Let me go back. How valuable are, let me make sure I didn't, yeah, how valuable are in-body scans, and do you recommend them? If so, how often? I do like a in-body scan. Again, it's probably one of the more accurate ways to measure. And it's also going to give you things like water retention and things like that. So I think that those are good things to have. I think that I recommend if you're going into a fat loss phase, I would recommend them probably every 60 to 90 days, because what happens is I see women they'll get into this thing where they do them every month. And so then they kind of start to obsess about the minute numbers. And it's like, oh, like I lost, half a percentage of body fat. And I'm like, maybe. You know what I mean? And I don't want to be harsh and make them feel bad about it. But it's like, that's not enough of a variable to really tell the direction that we're going. And the reason that I care about that is that the reverse is true, where they think something's happening and maybe they're like, oh, I lost a half a pound of muscle. And I'm like, it's fine. It just, like, we're looking at big numbers and we're looking at a trend. So what I would do is, if you want those things done, I would do them maybe a little bit more closer, like maybe every 60 days if you're going into a fat loss phase. Other than that, I would do it maybe, a couple times a year, just to kind of see where you're at. Can you review what you mean by macros? Macros are protein, carbs, and fat. So you have your total calories, and then of those calories, you have a protein number, percentage, grams or percentage. You have a carbohydrate target, and you have a fat target. So those are macronutrients. Ideally, Schmecht is at a 5. What is a realistic number to say you're stable to start this program? If they're at 4s and 5s on all of them, you should be fine to try it. And then you just pay attention. You just pay attention to, like, if I go to pull this trigger, am I getting a small reaction or am I getting a right? If you're getting that, then you got to go, okay, maybe let's just make sure I'm okay before I go too crazy with this. Grabbing these as we come through. Is there an ideal mix for the macros? What's the percentage target for each? I typically will, just to test people out, will take whatever their calories are, and then I'll either do one of two things, and it depends on really how heavy they are, because I don't want to take somebody, let's say somebody is 180 pounds. I'm not going to tell them to eat 180 grams of protein. Like, that's dumb. If you've never done it before, like that, there's no point to that. They can't digest it, right? So I will figure out like what they've been eating, and then I'll bump their protein up. And then I kind of just play with their carbs and fat based on what their preferences are, because I don't want to change it too much. And then I just pay attention to how their body's responding to that. If I have somebody who is super active, then I'll lower their fat down and I'll raise their carbs up. If I have somebody who really just struggles to get just general movement in and a workout or two per week, then I will lower their carbohydrates down and I'll bump their fat up, with the caveat that they have to count all of the fat, because small changes in fat make or break this. Or the other option that I'll do is a 40-30-30, which is 40. This is also a good place to start. 40% carbohydrates, 30% protein, 30% fat is a pretty balanced place to start. How do you figure out what your percentage should be for each macro? There you go. And then the last is, again, I will say I like meal batching versus meal prepping. So I don't like, even in a deficit, I don't create meals and then put them in individual containers. I like batching. So, and I eat this way all the time anyway. So like I have, on Sunday we did this, I'll have, especially now because we grill. So we did, my chicken sausages. I've got chicken. I've got ground turkey always that I can throw in. We went to Costco and they have the sirloin steak that's really good that I can just heat up in a pan. I've got eggs. I've got protein powder. Like, I've got all of those basics. I've got yogurt, right? So I know, like, these are my proteins and here's how I can mix and match that. I'll have gluten-free tortillas. I have gluten-free bread, which I don't do a ton of bread, but like I'll do one or the other typically in a day, or my protein pancakes. I always have rice in the refrigerator. I cook it and cool it because then it's easier on your blood sugar. I typically have sweet potatoes. I like to buy, this is how lazy I am, is both Whole Foods and Safeway has those little baby potatoes that you can buy that are they're literally just the potatoes that come with the seasoning and you throw them in the microwave and afterwards you put a little bit of oil on them with the seasoning. I buy those. I am that lazy when it comes to stuff like this. So I'll throw those in. What else do I have for carbs? And then I have fruit, bananas and berries, and pineapple is really good for digestion. So I have frozen pineapple in there. And then I always have greens because if I am struggling, if I'm busy to I like roasted vegetables. And so if I don't have any batched out, I'll just throw greens in something, heat it up and eat it. So I like batching because I find that it gives me more variety. I can take ground turkey and eat it in so many different ways, right? And then that way I don't get bored of what I'm eating. Um, don't let perfection be the enemy of great. We just want to hit consistency with this, and we're looking for a solid B performance. And lastly, when it comes to time, you will never have the time. You just need to create it. You do already spend the time. You just got to commit to doing it. And there are times that are best. We want to, again, pick times to do this when there's less known stresses that you're going to have to deal with. But the stresses are going to come regardless. You're not going to be able to control that. Life is lifey. And so then you just need to commit and go, just because a wave comes in, that doesn't mean I'm done. I got to keep going. So that's it. I'll open it up to any last questions.